Trade unions underpin democracy in a world where it is increasingly under threat. In spite of the decades of attacks aimed at undermining our ability to stand up for working people, we stand defiantly uncrushed. So the first thing I wanted to share with y'all today is actually an excerpt from something I happen to be reading. It's not even something I'm reading consistently. As I sometimes do with my attention deficits, I was randomly pulling books out of my bookshelf, ones that looked interesting, and just reading random segments of those books. And there's one that really seems relevant for our show. Why you should be a trade unionist. Right? Seems like it was written for us. It was actually written by Len McCluskey, a British labor organizer who wrote this book to demonstrate the ongoing importance of joining and strengthening unions and remind folks how unions are a means for working class people to win justice. So it's in the British context, but certainly applicable here as well. And I'm going to read a very brief excerpt. Trade unions underpin democracy in a world where it is increasingly under threat. In spite of the decades of attacks aimed at undermining our influence and ability to stand up for working people, we stand defiantly uncrushed. We are different groups of workers with different histories, different militancies, or none. Trade unions have to represent all those groups in different and new ways. But always the central theme of solidarity, which we can never put a price on, shines through. Workers want to be treated fairly. That's as common as drawing breath. We fight for fairness. Being trade unionists gives us the ability to look the boss in the eye, to look powerful people in the eye, and to stand firm against injustices. It gives us opportunities to be educated, to become future leaders, and to meet so many good people along the way. Unions are as necessary today as they were during and after the Industrial Revolution. And being an active trade unionist shows us how we can affect the lives of those around us. As trade unionists, we must restore hope. To quote from Percy Shelley's The Mask of Anarchy, we must rise like lions, rise to the challenges, and never lose faith in our collective power. Tony Benn told of how his father said to him, "Dare to be a Daniel, dare to let it be known." Now I say to my children, there is always more to be done. And above all, have the courage to always be on the side of the angels. Trade unionists care for people. They defend people. It's why being a trade unionist matters. Wanted to just drop that into the discussion today. I think it's always helpful to kind of refocus on your purpose and reflect on your purpose and remember why it is we do the things that we do. Why we are trade unionists, why that matters to us. And I really liked what McCluskey had to say there. Ultimately, it's about caring about people. Humanitarianism, ultimately.
McCluskey touched on something that McAlevey also mentions in her books, which is, when he says that we're different groups of workers with different histories, different militancies, or none. Trade unions have to represent all those groups in different ways and in new ways, and that's something that really makes trade unions unique in civic organizations. McAlevey calls union organizing structure-based organizing, I think, as opposed to mobilizing, because when you think about other civic organizations, you think about organizations like Alan Minsky's The Progressive Democrats of America. That's totally and radically different. Not that it's bad, not that it's not good work or whatever, but totally radically different from a union, because the Progressive Democrats of America, the only people that are ever going to that are going to enter into, membership with that organization or support for that organization are people that are already on board with the program, are people that already consider themselves progressive Democrats. Harvey J. Kaye mentioned that he's a Democratic Socialist. The only people that are ever going to join DSA is people that consider themselves at least Democratic Socialists. You have, and so it's a self-selecting group, Where unions, we are selected by the boss. We're selected by the employer. We don't get to select who we organize with. We organize with whoever happens to be around us. And so there's going to be old people, there's going to be young people, there will be actual literal conservatives, people that are voting for Trump, much less a centrist Democrat that we have to organize with, right? We have to, we're having to organize all across the thing. And so being able to unify, which is the job of a union, which is the only way that a union can function and be powerful and be worth anything, is that it's able to unify people across these divides of
right.
gender and race and politics and all of these things. And that's what makes that unification so uniquely powerful.
Right.
When you're able to, when you come up and you've got this petition that's signed by, 30 different progressive organizations, it's like, well, that's one thing. But you get something that's signed by everybody in one workplace, no matter what their political beliefs are. And that's what a union is. That's really powerful. Obviously, it's powerful for the boss, and we understand why that is, because of the leverage, and the labor power that the workers create, and that's the only way that the employer, the business, is able to function. But also civically, if you get it means something different, I think, and I think it should to politicians. It means something different when a union wants something, when a union has their membership backing something, than it does if you get some other, a progressive party or a progressive organization or something else. It just means something different. And I think, like for like, it means something more if you've got, a similar amount of people in a union versus a similar amount of people in a political organization. It means something more when you get a union actually involved.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think there is a distinction there between unions and other organizations, such as political parties. Labor unions, even with some of their traditions, even some of their baggage and weaknesses, they are working class institutions. They belong to workers on a fundamental level, right? I mean, they're funded through member dues. Through some governance structure, there is a democratic governance among workers running the organization, and there's no such relationship with the Democratic Party
right.
at state, national level. There's no such operation with most of the other civic organizations that we're talking about and political conversations. It's not the same kind of membership structure. It's not the same kind of governance structure. It's different aims. It's different accountability levels. And so, I was thinking about it earlier in the context of like working within, right? Reformers working within a union and reformers working within a party. And while there are similarities, and I think some tactics and maybe even strategies that can be shared, that fundamental difference there is something we have to account for.
Right.
That unions are unique in that way. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing to have our own institutions, and to the extent that our existing labor unions do not really belong to the members, it's certainly one of our biggest challenges that we have to address.
And I think that's why, talking about reformers within political parties versus within unions, I think that's why we're much more skeptical of reform efforts within like the Democratic Party. I think, and we're not unhappy or we just had Alan Minsky on Progressive Democrats of America. We're fine. That's fine if that's what people want to do. But I think that the Adam and I are not opposed to it, but we're more skeptical. Whereas we're not at all skeptical of union reformers because like you said and like I said, it's unions fundamentally different than political parties, and fundamentally more worth saving and more intrinsically valuable, I think.
Well, and I would say they kind of have to come before the other. A renewed union movement will have working class power reflected in other institutions.
Right. Right.
But I would add an asterisk to your statement about lack of skepticism of reformers, that is until they get elected. In which case, I'm going to be just as skeptical of them as the establishment that you challenged, because quite often they're going to run into some similar issues that the establishment ran into. And this year's reformers can become next decade's establishment.
Yeah. I meant reform as a strategy, as opposed to
individuals. Sure. I just wanted to make sure I clarified that it's not like we're naive that suddenly you start a rank and file caucus in a union and all of a sudden everything's going to work out your way, or that in it of itself is going to justify your victory or grant you victory. But yeah, I think those are some important things to consider when it comes to trade unions and labor unions and how they relate to other organizations, but some of the really unique aspects to them that we need to account for in our strategy.
Fascinating comment here in the chat from Free American 2020. I grew up in the 60s. My dad was a local union president in Alabama. As a young child, I'd hear the racist comments that people would make, and I remember my dad fighting for all the union members. As a little kid, I remember asking him, why did the union fight for everyone? He said, we stand together or we all fall. I'll never forget that. And that is, it sounds like your dad was a really, really good union leader.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's exactly the kind of stuff that that we want.
That's one of the reasons why unions are perceived as such a threat to the political establishment and to the wealthy, powerful elites in this country and elsewhere. It's not just a direct economic aspect in terms of, they'll have more bargaining power in the workplace, they can extract higher salaries and benefits, etc. Right. Obviously, that is a major part of it. But it is also the power of solidarity to break down other divisions and bigotry and oppression. That power of solidarity, it's scary to the powers that be, right? They're fearful of that, and they always have been fearful of that throughout the history of our country. So I think that's also something that the comment reflects for me. He's like that power, right? The power of a concept and an organization so strong that in a time when white supremacy was so blatantly in your face, that it could stand strong and defiant against such, bigotry.
Well, and that's how bosses and politicians campaigned against unions back, you're talking about in the 60s and before, when unions really kind of came into their own in this country and really became a force. In the 50s and 60s, 1 in 3 Americans were union members. When the CIO launched its Operation Dixie, that's when you started seeing this proliferation of right-to-work laws. And one of the things that the original pushers of right-to-work were saying that was important to have right-to-work is so that their white women didn't have to be in unions, didn't have to be mandated to be in unions with black people. That was specifically one of the things that the people who created right-to-work were fighting for. And that's how, in individual campaigns as well, people were fighting back against unions by saying, if you be part of a union, you're going to be part of an organization that also has black people, even if the black people aren't even in your union at your work, that union represents black people somewhere else, and isn't that so bad, right?
And let's not pretend that doesn't still happen and that these conversations aren't still happening. I mean, it was just a few years ago that UAW was organizing in Canton, Mississippi, right outside of Jackson, and the KKK put out flyers urging people to vote no in the campaign. Well, and this is within 5 years ago. And
and William Pina in the chat mentions that Ron Herrera, a few years ago, Ron Herrera was a few weeks ago, the president of the Labor Council in Los Angeles, talking about monkeys and stuff. I mean, it's crazy.
But like I was saying, in terms of the discouragement from unionization, race is still definitely in the background. Sometimes it's in the foreground. Yeah. But it's always at least in the background here in the South in conversations that people are having, particularly behind closed doors, because there has been this long concerted effort to tell white folks that unions are not for them, while also telling black folks that they're not for them either. Right? So, that has been a struggle here in the South and will continue to be a struggle here in the South. But I think when you struggle together and you fight for each other's common interests, just like our listener's father, fighting for everyone so that you don't fall apart.
Yeah.
I mean, that's and I think that the experience of doing that is one of the most powerful ways to reduce the influence of bigotry in our society. When folks are shoulder to shoulder for a common struggle and a common issue, it breaks down barriers. And, about 2 years ago, I guess on the show, you actually had a professor from the University of Washington who went over his research proving how unionization decreases racism among its membership. Obviously, it didn't work for that creep Ron Herrera,
right?
But him aside, it's obviously we have to fight racism with solidarity, and I think unions are one of the best pathways to do that.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.